Welcome to Truth Behind History, the channel where we explore the hidden stories and fascinating developments that shaped the world. Today, we're diving into the evolution of warfare, from the earliest weapons to the cutting-edge technology of modern combat. Warfare has been around for as long as humans have had disputes, land to protect, and ambitions to pursue. But in the beginning, combat was far from the highly coordinated military operations we think of today. It was raw, it was primal, and it was all about survival. And in the early days, survival depended on two of the most fundamental weapons ever created, the spear and the bow. First, let's talk about the spear. This was the original all-purpose weapon, used for hunting, self-defense, and eventually, organized combat. Early humans started with simple sharpened sticks, but over time, they figured out that attaching a stone, bone, or metal tip made the spear deadlier and more effective. A well-thrown spear meant the difference between eating dinner and being dinner. And in battle, a long, sturdy spear could keep an enemy, or a charging animal, at bay. Now, while the spear gave warriors reach and power, it had one major limitation: you had to get close to your enemy. That's where the bow came in. The introduction of the bow changed everything. Suddenly, humans could attack from a distance. No longer did they need to engage in hand-to-hand combat to strike down an enemy or take down a large animal. This was a game-changer for both hunting and warfare. With a bow, a skilled archer could rain down arrows on an opponent without ever getting within striking range. Imagine being a warrior armed only with a spear and suddenly realizing your enemy could hit you before you even got close. That's the kind of advantage bows created on the battlefield. But weapons alone don't make a society powerful, strategy does. The development of spears and bows led to a new level of organization among early human groups. Instead of scattered fights between individuals, these weapons encouraged structured combat formations, defensive strategies, and the protection of territory. This marked the beginning of military strategy. People began fortifying settlements, forming warrior groups, and defending resources, laying the groundwork for organized armies. The spear and bow weren't just tools, they were foundations of civilization. They determined who thrived and who perished, who ruled and who was conquered. And while they may seem simple compared to the high-tech weapons of today, these two inventions shaped the future of warfare in ways that are still relevant thousands of years later. But of course, warfare didn't stop there. As societies grew, so did their ambitions, and so did their weapons. In the next section, we'll see how advances in metallurgy, transportation, and siege tactics transformed small-scale combat into large-scale warfare. Stay with me, because things are about to get even more intense. Now that we've seen how early weapons laid the foundation for organized combat, let's move forward to a time when warfare became more sophisticated, more strategic, and far deadlier. With the rise of ancient civilizations came the need for stronger, more versatile weapons and tactics. And that's where three revolutionary innovations came into play: the sword, the chariot, and siege weapons. Let's start with the sword. Unlike spears and bows, which were primarily used for hunting before being adapted for combat, the sword was designed specifically for one purpose: battle. Early swords were crafted from bronze, a metal that was stronger than stone but still relatively soft. This meant that bronze swords would bend or break after repeated use. But then came the Iron Age. Iron swords were stronger, sharper, and more durable, making them the weapon of choice for warriors across the ancient world. With a sword in hand, a soldier could fight with speed and precision, making close combat engagements deadlier than ever. But ground combat alone wasn't enough to dominate a battlefield. Armies needed speed, mobility, and a way to outmaneuver their opponents. Enter the chariot. The introduction of chariots revolutionized warfare by turning the battlefield into a high-speed arena. Imagine an army on foot facing an enemy charging toward them on fast-moving, horse-drawn chariots. The psychological impact alone was overwhelming. Chariots allowed archers and warriors to strike quickly and retreat before their enemies had a chance to respond. In the hands of skilled warriors, chariots could cut through enemy lines, flank opposing forces, and create chaos among foot soldiers. Civilizations like the Egyptians, Hittites, and Assyrians mastered the use of chariots, using them to expand their empires and dominate their enemies. But even the most well-equipped armies faced a major problem: fortified cities. As civilizations grew, they built walls, massive stone barriers designed to keep invaders out. And if you couldn't break through those walls, your army was useless. That's where siege weapons came in. Battering rams, siege towers, and catapults were developed to bring down walls, breach defenses, and make city conquests possible. A battering ram could smash through wooden gates, while a siege tower allowed soldiers to scale walls and attack from above. Suddenly, no city was completely safe. If an army had the right siege equipment and the patience to wait out a long siege, they could bring even the strongest fortifications to their knees. With these advancements, warfare was no longer just about brute strength, it was about technology, strategy, and innovation. Armies that embraced these new weapons had a massive advantage, and those that resisted change were left behind, or worse, conquered. But as history has shown, war never stays the same for long. Just when one civilization thought they had the upper hand, another breakthrough would change the rules of battle all over again. And the next revolution in warfare? It came from a discovery that would eventually alter the course of human history forever: gunpowder. Stay with me, because we're about to enter an explosive new era. For thousands of years, battles were fought with swords, arrows, and siege engines. But then came gunpowder, and with it, a transformation that completely reshaped the battlefield. Gunpowder was first developed in China, and at first, it wasn't even intended for warfare. It was created by alchemists searching for elixirs of immortality, which is ironic considering how it would go on to cause more destruction than almost any other invention in history. Once its explosive properties were discovered, however, it didn't take long for people to figure out that gunpowder could be weaponized. And soon, it began spreading across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, forever changing the way wars were fought. The earliest firearms were crude but effective. Chinese armies used hand cannons, simple tubes that could launch projectiles with an explosion of gunpowder. These eventually evolved into more sophisticated firearms like the arquebus, an early type of musket. Compared to bows, firearms required less skill and strength to operate. A well-trained archer took years to master their craft, but a soldier could be trained to fire a musket in a matter of weeks. And while early firearms were slow to reload and sometimes unreliable, they had one major advantage: the sheer force of a bullet was powerful enough to punch through armor, rendering traditional plate armor and chainmail useless. But it wasn't just individual combat that changed, entire armies had to adapt. The rise of cannons and artillery meant that massive stone walls, which had once been considered impenetrable, could now be blown apart. Fortifications that had stood for centuries were suddenly vulnerable. The medieval castle, once the ultimate symbol of strength and security, became obsolete almost overnight. Gunpowder weapons also led to changes in military strategy. Instead of relying on heavily armored knights and hand-to-hand combat, armies began using tightly organized formations, firing in coordinated volleys to overwhelm their enemies. Battles became louder, deadlier, and more chaotic, with thick smoke filling the air and explosions shaking the ground. But of course, the invention of gunpowder was just the beginning. As technology improved, firearms became more accurate, faster to reload, and easier to produce. Wars would never be the same again. And as we move forward in history, we'll see how the Industrial Revolution took these weapons to a whole new level, bringing about rapid-fire guns, mechanized warfare, and devastating artillery that would define the modern battlefield. Stay with me, because things are about to get even more intense. Gunpowder may have revolutionized warfare, but industrialization took it to a whole new level. The 19th and early 20th centuries saw rapid advancements in technology, production, and military strategy, leading to weapons that could fire faster, farther, and deadlier than ever before. This was the era of industrial warfare, where mass production and mechanization redefined how wars were fought. First, let's talk about the advancement of firearms. In earlier centuries, muskets were slow to reload, inaccurate, and required a lot of effort to use effectively. But by the late 19th century, the introduction of bolt-action rifles changed everything. These rifles were faster, more accurate, and could be reloaded in seconds instead of minutes. Soldiers no longer had to stand in rigid formations, reloading between every shot. Now they could fire repeatedly, making combat more mobile and unpredictable. But if rifles changed infantry combat, machine guns completely transformed the battlefield. The Maxim gun, one of the first fully automatic weapons, could fire hundreds of rounds per minute. This was a game changer. Imagine an army advancing across an open field, only to be cut down in seconds by a single well-placed machine gun nest. Traditional battle tactics had to be abandoned, because the old way of fighting, marching in formation and charging the enemy, was now a death sentence. And then there was heavy artillery, which made battlefields more destructive than ever before. In wars of the past, armies fought in relatively open spaces, with cavalry charges and sword fights deciding the outcome. But now, artillery shells could flatten entire landscapes, creating massive craters, obliterating fortifications, and forcing soldiers to dig in, literally. This led to the brutal trench warfare of World War I, where soldiers lived in muddy, disease-ridden trenches for months at a time, barely moving as artillery rained down on them day and night. Battles became drawn-out wars of attrition, with both sides launching frontal assaults that resulted in catastrophic losses. The firepower was overwhelming, but strategy had not yet caught up to the technology. The result? Some of the bloodiest battles in human history, where tens of thousands of men could die in a single day without either side gaining significant ground. At this point, warfare was no longer about who had the better soldiers, it was about who had the better machines. The Industrial Revolution had turned combat into a battle of production and efficiency. But as devastating as World War I was, it was only the beginning. Because just a few decades later, humanity would enter an even deadlier phase, one where warfare would become truly mechanized, and a single bomb could erase an entire city. Stay with me, because next, we're heading into the most destructive conflict in human history, World War II. If World War I was a brutal introduction to industrial warfare, then World War II perfected it and made it even deadlier. This was the era of tanks, bombers, and ultimately, the atomic bomb. It was a war unlike any before it, fought on a scale that had never been seen, with battles spanning continents, air superiority becoming a decisive factor, and technology pushing the limits of destruction. Let's start with tank warfare. While tanks made their debut in World War I, they were slow, unreliable, and often broke down before they could even reach the enemy. But by World War II, tanks had become faster, more powerful, and central to military strategy. The Germans perfected a tactic called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, which combined fast-moving tanks, mechanized infantry, and air support to overwhelm enemy defenses before they had time to react. Instead of slow, drawn-out trench warfare, battles were now won through speed and surprise. The sight of German panzer divisions rolling across Europe struck terror into their enemies, proving that mobility and firepower were the new kings of the battlefield. But while tanks dominated the ground, bombers ruled the skies. Air power became a decisive factor in World War II, and nations built massive fleets of bombers to strike enemy cities, supply lines, and military installations. The London Blitz, the bombing of Dresden, and the devastating air raids over Japan showed just how destructive air power had become. This wasn't just about taking out military targets anymore, entire cities were reduced to rubble in the span of hours. For the first time in history, civilians were on the front lines, experiencing the full force of modern warfare. And then, everything changed with the atomic bomb. By 1945, the world had already seen devastation on an unimaginable scale, but no one was prepared for what was coming next. The Manhattan Project, a secret US program, had successfully developed a weapon so powerful that it could wipe out an entire city in seconds. On August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. In an instant, over 100,000 people were killed, entire cities were vaporized, and the world entered a new era, the nuclear age. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki brought about the end of World War II, but they also introduced a terrifying reality. War was no longer just about winning battles or taking territory. Now, humanity had the power to destroy itself completely. And that realization would shape the world for decades to come. Because after World War II ended, the world didn't just move on peacefully. Instead, it divided into two opposing superpowers, each racing to build bigger, deadlier, and more advanced weapons. And that's where we're headed next, the Cold War, where warfare became less about direct battles and more about nuclear deterrence, space technology, and a constant game of brinkmanship that kept the world on edge for nearly 50 years. Stay with me, because the next chapter in warfare is just as intense, except this time, the greatest weapon wasn't firepower. It was fear. World War II may have ended, but the world was far from peaceful. Instead, the global stage was set for a new kind of war, one not fought with traditional armies, but with ideologies, technology, and the looming threat of total annihilation. This was the Cold War, a period of intense rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union that lasted for nearly 50 years. At the heart of this conflict was the nuclear arms race. The United States had shown the world what nuclear weapons could do in 1945, and it didn't take long for the Soviet Union to catch up. By 1949, they had developed their own atomic bomb, and from that moment on, both superpowers were locked in a deadly game of one-upmanship. Each side built more bombs, bigger bombs, deadlier bombs, leading to a terrifying concept known as mutually assured destruction, or MAD. The idea was simple: if one side launched a nuclear strike, the other would retaliate with full force, ensuring that both nations, and possibly the entire world, would be wiped out. This created a constant state of tension, where a single miscalculation or misunderstanding could have led to global catastrophe. But nuclear bombs alone weren't enough. Both nations needed a faster way to deliver them, which led to the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs. These missiles could travel across the world in minutes, carrying nuclear warheads that could obliterate entire cities. Unlike bombers, which could be shot down, ICBMs were nearly impossible to stop once launched. This meant that wars no longer had to be fought with soldiers on the ground. A single button press could decide the fate of millions. And as if nuclear weapons weren't enough, the Cold War also extended into space. The space race wasn't just about scientific progress or national pride, it was about military dominance. The launch of Sputnik, the first satellite, in 1957 sent a clear message: whoever controlled space, controlled the future of warfare. Satellites could be used for spying, communication, and even guiding missile systems. The Cold War superpowers weren't just fighting for influence on Earth, they were preparing for a future where wars could be fought from orbit. Despite all this tension, the Cold War never erupted into full-scale conflict. Instead, it played out through proxy wars, intelligence operations, and strategic posturing. But make no mistake, while nuclear bombs weren't dropped, the Cold War shaped modern warfare in ways that are still felt today. And just when it seemed like war couldn't evolve any further, the 21st century introduced something completely different. The battlefield was no longer just land, sea, or even space. Now, war had gone digital. Because the future of warfare wouldn't be decided by missiles or tanks, but by drones, cyber attacks, and artificial intelligence. Stay with me, because the next phase of military history is unlike anything we've seen before. If the Cold War was defined by nuclear threats and global tensions, modern warfare has taken things in a completely new direction. Today, wars are no longer just fought by soldiers on the ground or pilots in the sky. Instead, technology has taken center stage, turning battlefields into a mix of automation, cyber warfare, and artificial intelligence. One of the biggest game changers has been the rise of military drones. In the past, air superiority depended on highly trained pilots flying advanced fighter jets and bombers. But now, wars can be fought remotely, with unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, capable of conducting surveillance, launching precision strikes, and even engaging in dogfights. The advantage is obvious: no pilot means no risk of losing valuable human lives. A drone operator sitting thousands of miles away can eliminate a target with pinpoint accuracy, reducing collateral damage and allowing nations to strike at their enemies without ever stepping foot on the battlefield. But drones are just one piece of the puzzle. The newest form of warfare doesn't involve bullets or bombs, it's fought in cyberspace. Cyber warfare has become one of the most powerful weapons in modern conflicts. Nations now engage in hacking attacks, digital espionage, and cyber sabotage to disrupt enemy governments, damage infrastructure, and even manipulate public opinion. Entire power grids, financial systems, and military networks can be taken down with a single well-executed cyber attack. And the most frightening part? Cyber warfare often happens in secret, meaning that attacks can go unnoticed until it's too late. In the wrong hands, hacking is just as dangerous as any missile strike. And then, we have artificial intelligence. AI is changing the battlefield in ways that were once pure science fiction. Military AI systems can analyze vast amounts of battlefield data, predict enemy movements, and even autonomously engage in combat. Some AI-driven weapons are designed to select and eliminate targets without human intervention, raising serious ethical concerns about the future of warfare. Are we heading toward a world where wars are fought by machines? And if so, who controls them? All of this signals a massive shift in how wars are fought. No longer is the strongest military simply the one with the biggest army or the most powerful weapons. The new battlefields are digital, automated, and intelligence-driven. Wars are now fought in real time, with nations defending against invisible threats as much as physical ones. But if you think modern warfare is advanced, just wait until you see what's coming next. Because the future of warfare isn't just about automation and AI, it's about hypersonic weapons, quantum technology, and robotic soldiers that could change the very nature of war itself. Stay with me, because the final chapter of this story is something straight out of science fiction. We've traveled through thousands of years of warfare, from spears and swords to drones and artificial intelligence. But now, we're stepping into the future, a world where technology is advancing so rapidly that wars in the coming decades might look completely unrecognizable from anything we've seen before. One of the most terrifying developments is hypersonic weapons. These missiles don't just travel fast, they move at speeds of Mach 5 or higher, meaning over 5 times the speed of sound. That's so fast that most traditional missile defense systems can't even react in time. Hypersonic missiles can strike anywhere in the world in minutes, making them one of the most dangerous advancements in military history. The race to develop and defend against them is already underway, and it's only a matter of time before they become a standard part of warfare. But speed isn't the only thing changing. The battlefield itself is evolving with the rise of quantum warfare. Quantum computing and cryptography could completely change cybersecurity, making existing encryption methods obsolete overnight. This means that the countries with the best quantum technology could break into any system, control any network, and potentially disable entire military infrastructures with the press of a button. Wars may no longer be fought with guns and bombs, but with mathematical power so advanced that it can control information itself. And then, we have AI-driven military technology, where fully autonomous drones, robotic soldiers, and AI-controlled command structures could replace human decision-making on the battlefield. Imagine armies made entirely of machines, capable of executing orders without hesitation, fear, or fatigue. This raises one of the biggest ethical questions of our time. Should machines be allowed to decide who lives and who dies? As warfare becomes increasingly automated and intelligence-driven, the balance of power in the world is shifting. The future of military conflict may not be determined by who has the biggest army, but by who has the smartest technology, the fastest weapons, and the most advanced artificial intelligence. So where does this leave us? Throughout history, every advancement in warfare has redefined how battles are fought and how nations rise and fall. But one thing has remained constant: war never stays the same for long. What was once unthinkable becomes reality. What was once cutting edge becomes obsolete. And as we move further into the future, one question remains. Are we heading toward a world where wars are fought by machines, dictated by artificial intelligence, and decided in the blink of an eye? Or will the next great innovation in warfare be the one that finally puts an end to war itself? If you found this deep dive into the evolution of warfare interesting, make sure to subscribe to Truth Behind History, like this video, and drop a comment below. What do you think is the most important military advancement in history? And where do you see warfare heading next? Let's keep the conversation going. And if you love learning about history, check out my other videos for more stories that shape the world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.